So we're going to talk a little bit about Dharma, and Dharma is the Sanskrit word which means duty. So just to tell you guys, to track back a little bit, when I was 21, I was kind of failing out of college and ended up spending some time at an ashram in India. And an ashram is kind of like a monastery. It's a place where people go and do like yoga and meditation, and it's kind of where monks live and where they kind of do their thing. And it was a really transformative experience for me, and I realized that a lot of the values and ways that we look at life, which are based on Western philosophy, leave something to be desired. And I'll explain a little bit about what I'm talking about. So in psychiatry, we tend to try to move people away from suffering. So if there's someone who's depressed or has anxiety, as a psychiatrist, it's my job to make them undepressed and not feel anxiety. In the West, we have this general idea, which makes perfect sense, that what you want to do, if you're in a bad spot, that you should move out of the bad spot and move into a good spot, right? Like we make people better, and we want to move away from suffering and move towards pleasure and move away from pain. In the East, they say something a little bit different. So Buddha said that all human beings are entitled to two things. The first is suffering, and the second is death. And that's all you're entitled to, which is kind of like a grim outlook. But it turns out to be true. And what Buddha found is that it's not enough to just run away from suffering, and that actually a lot of times as you try to run away from suffering, you actually create more suffering for yourself. And if we think a little bit about gaming, how many of you guys would say that by running away from your suffering through gaming, you're actually creating more suffering for yourselves, right? Like everyone agrees with that. Like it's common sense. But it's crazy to actually think about that the way that you cope with a problem actually makes the problem worse. But it's absolutely true of most gamers. So how do we get around that? What we do is we go back to Buddha, right? Because he's a smart guy. He knows what the fuck he's talking about, right? Like he's Buddha. So what he says is that the way to live life is actually not to avoid suffering, but to live your dharma, which means to live your duty or your responsibility. And what Buddha discovered, which actually is kind of common sense once we kind of talk about it, is that if you are living in service to your duty, if you're trying to do something for a higher cause, or if you're living up to your responsibilities, that there's an immense amount of strength and tolerance that you'll get access to. If you think about parents, so like most parents can sacrifice immense amounts of, personal comfort or satisfaction for the sake of their children, and they do it in a heartbeat. Like if a parent could trade their life to save their child from cancer, they do it in a heartbeat. Interestingly enough, gamers are very good at actually sacrificing for other people. And if you think about it, where does that strength come from? How is it that you can sacrifice so much for the sake of someone else? And when you sacrifice, you're the one that suffers, right? I mean, that's how it works. That's what sacrifice means, is that you give something else, you give up something, and you're the one who's worse off. And so what this all comes back to is dharma. If you as a gamer can figure out what your dharma is, if you can be sort of rooted in your dharma and grounded in it, if you can say that this is my duty, this is my responsibility in life, this is who I commit myself to be, you'll be amazed at how much strength you get out of that. You'll be amazed at how much you can withstand and how much of an energy reserve you'll have to move forward in the way that you want to. And when I work with my patients, I actually don't try to help them, I don't try to alleviate their suffering. Sometimes I'll start out that way, but over time what I find is the best treatment for depression is to actually have people living in accordance with their duty. And that sort of taps into this weird like higher power bullshit, which like I don't quite understand. But sometimes human beings, when they serve a cause that's greater than themselves, they're able to accomplish things that are superhuman. And if you look at history, you'll see this. All of the people who have accomplished really amazing things, like you look at people like Mahatma Gandhi, you look at people like MLK, on the other end of the spectrum, you even look at people like Adolf Hitler. Why was Hitler able to change Europe so much and turn Germany, which had been a shithole after World War I, into this ultimate powerhouse that threatened an entire continent? It's because he was living in service to this greater idea. And when you tap into that as a gamer, if you can figure out what that is for yourself, you'll have an immense amount of energy. So how do you find your Dharma? How do you actually do that? How do you tap into that? This actually kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier. I mean, you have to reflect. You really have to externalize it. And I'd say that stick with the same exercise I told you about earlier, which is write something on a piece of paper. So put down on a piece of paper, what are your actual responsibilities? What is your duty as a human being on this earth? What is your actual duty? Like, what is the meaning of your existence here? And a lot of you guys may say, like, when you actually sit down and try to put it down on a piece of paper, it's going to be hard, because what is your duty? I mean, what the fuck are you doing? Like, what's the meaning of your life? You sit there and you play video games all day. Like, where is there meaning in that? And that's exactly the fucking problem, right? Because you guys don't have meaning in your life. And so you have to figure out what your meaning is. And the second you figure out what your meaning is, you're going to start to get more motivation. You're going to start to get that fuel. You'll start to get energy, and then you'll be able to overcome that video game addiction. You'll be able to overcome your gaming and get some control in your life.
I have a question.
Yeah.
How do you find meaning in your life?
So there are a couple of ways. The first is, so like I said, you can sit down with a piece of paper, and I'd start by actually writing down on that piece of paper, what is your duty? Who are you responsible to as a human being? Whose life depends on you doing something? And you may find that actually there's no one in your life that depends on you. That's actually the case for most young people. So then what I'd say is take one step forward and ask yourself, actually don't ask yourself, well, so the other way you find meaning is by actually engaging in experience. So sitting at home, you're not going to actually learn what your responsibilities are, because you actually don't have responsibilities. So what I encourage you to do is just get some experience. Human beings are designed to crave and want experiences, and we learn a lot through experience. So I'd say get out of the house and just do something. It doesn't matter what it is. Just go somewhere and do something, volunteer or find a job or go to an art museum. It doesn't matter what you do. Go somewhere, but in the back of your mind, whenever you do that thing, go for a hike, go meet friends for drinks, it doesn't matter what you do. In the back of your mind, have this thought, and look at this room. Like, let's say you're sitting at a table and you're meeting people for drinks. And just like pause and look at the people that you're with and ask yourself, do I have a duty here? Do I have a responsibility? And you may find yes, and you may find no. And when you go for a hike, do the same thing. And ask yourself, like, what am I doing here? Like, is there any kind of duty or responsibility that arises here? What is it that I want to do? What is it that I need to do? What is it that I was put on this earth to do? And the more places you go, and you may say, and this is where gamers are going to be like, well, I mean, how the fuck am I going to know what I'm supposed to do if I go for a hike? How is there any duty or responsibility there? And you're right, and that's a rational explanation. That's an analytical answer to your question. You know, sure, there's no duty that you're going to find by going for a hike, but the problem with gamers is that the only thing that you use to learn is your analytical mind. And there are parts of yourself and parts of your mind and parts of your brain that are more intuitive, that are more emotional, and you have to give them space for them to actually have thoughts that come up. And so it's bizarre, but like, why do people go for retreats out in the wilderness? Like, people go for retreats out in the wilderness, right? Like, it happens all the time. Like, how the fuck does that help? How do like trees and leaves and streams help you get perspective in life? Honestly, I have no fucking idea how that works. But the truth is, it does work. That's how people find meaning in life, is they go and they like sit under a tree for a while, and they like breathe fresh air, and they hike for a while, and their muscles are sore, and they go to sleep at night, and they wake up in the morning, and somehow they've found meaning. I have no fucking idea how it works. But I do know that it does work. So I think what you've got to do is get your ass off of the chair and go do something. It doesn't matter what it is, and in the back of your mind, try to ask yourself, like, what am I supposed to do? What's my responsibility here? Do I have any responsibility? And the more that you create space away from your analytical mind, which comes up with logical answers with your limited set of data, which you guys get from playing video games, which is like all the data that y'all have. And so you come up with these logical conclusions, but those logical conclusions, while they may sound like they make sense, don't actually improve your life in any way. So you got to get your ass out of the chair and go do something else. And you will be amazed at what your brain is capable of when you give it a diversity of experience. Your brain is going to take in that fresh air, and it's going to listen to the stream, and it's going to look at the piece of art, and it's going to listen to the music and listen to your friends. And somehow something is going to happen in your unconscious mind, and you're going to come out the other end. The sausage is going to be made, and you're going to have meaning. And it's just, I don't know how the fuck it works, but that's how it works.